Hey, Dan.
Morning, Joe.
How are you?
I think the plant behind you needs a little water.
Looks like nobody else wants to be seen yet.
I'll keep you company.
I'm here, Joe. I'm going to set up here. Good morning, guys.
Morning, Dennis.
Oh, there you are.
I am here.
Hey, Dennis.
Yeah, how you doing, Joe? My picture went away. There we go. I fixed it.
Might as well light my face a little more. Is it snowing by you guys' houses?
I'm up in Cary here and it's not snowing now. It was a little earlier.
Is it snowing by you, Dennis?
No, up here in Cary, it's not snowing anymore. It snowed a little earlier, but it stopped right away here.
We just got flurries over here.
Yeah. They were showing on the weather this morning, I guess like Naperville was catching it pretty good.
Huh. Well, that's what they get for living on the south side.
That's right.
Morning, everybody.
Morning.
How's it going?
Morning,
Good.
Frank.
Hey,
What's
Joe,
the-
I was driving down Howard Street the other day and it looked like they were digging up Hoffa's bones from some gigantic hole over there. What's going on?
On Howard Street? Oh, they're
Yeah,
putting a new water pipe.
I know, but man, it needs to be closed. Seriously, there's some potholes there that'll swallow up a semi.
Well, it's not my problem. I don't work there anymore full time.
Make it, come on, make it your problem. You got the big guy's phone number, right?
It doesn't matter. It's none of my business.
Ah. How you doing there, Dan?
Good, Frank. How are you?
Good.
Good morning.
Morning,
Hi,
Jeanette.
Jeanette.
Good morning, Jeanette.
We've been waiting for you.
Stop snowing? No, it's still snowing.
It's not snowing
No.
up here north.
It's snowing still over here.
It's not snowing in my basement / beautiful office.
Good morning, everyone,
Good morning.
on this beautiful snowy day.
Yes.
Is it
Hey,
snowing
I-
there, Russ?
It's off and on. It's flurrying.
How do you guys like this picture I pulled off the internet from the space station? It shows Chicago, the northern and the Milky Way all in one.
Cool.
That's pretty cool.
I
Yeah.
love that picture.
Very
What's that green?
That's the original.
Is it?
Yeah,
You can see that far north. Wow.
from the space shuttle,
Yeah.
not the shuttle, the space station, International Space Station. Look at that, but it's just, it's beautiful. I can't get over that picture. Can't get enough of it.
I get those NASA pictures every day on Instagram and I just love looking at them.
Well, if you see one you really like, you can save it. And,
Yeah.
as long as you're not making money using it, it's fine.
Yeah.
It's legal.
In each region. And I say the only that a lot of these companies are going to be capable of that.
Is Ryan on?
Yeah, I'm
Yes,
here.
he
Can you
is.
see me, Joe?
Oh, there you are. Yeah. Looks like your work is almost done, huh? Well,
Hey, missed it.
at least this phase of your work.
Yeah, I think a big milestone today. Hopefully, will be a good step forward into the next phase of getting a official program.
Yeah. Yeah, this is it. I think depending upon how long this goes, we could start a discussion toward a vote, or we can forego the discussion until next meeting and just start the next meeting and have the discussion straight through. We'll see how it goes. Of course, next, I was just thinking, next meeting, don't we still have to talk about the odds and ends?
Well, I think we still have, and I'll speak to that today, that a lot of these, if we're able to narrow down the alternatives to, a couple, we still have to do a lot of refinement, as you put it, odds and ends on headings and iterations of the schedule. So yeah, there is still work to do before I think we have a final alternative.
Okay. Hey, Malcolm.
Hey, good morning, Joe. Had our first budget meeting last night, rather grim.
I don't envy you guys, not at all.
We went through an early retirement, 24 people early retired.
That helps.
We had to cut our head count. We had no choice.
Yeah.
So it's disruptive. And then we're not adding them back. So we're trying to get other staff to cover their jobs. And
Sure.
that's the world that we live in right now.
Yeah.
And we were one of the strongest communities in the northwest suburbs. We had a $17 million reserve. But, geez, we just got our casino up. Now they're posing new restrictions down to 25%. So,
Yeah.
man, it's not easy. So I know you sat there for so many years. You know exactly what I'm talking about.
I think we're talking about cutting in good times.
Yeah.
I have no idea what they're going to do now.
Well, the numbers aren't there, so you got to do something. You got to. And you got unions to deal with. It's not like you just go do what you want to do. You don't have that option. So, but anyway, who knows with what's going on now and these new restrictions?
Yeah.
Like a double whammy. So I don't know. So we'll see.
Yeah. Well,
It's
looks
good.
like it's morning.
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 Looks like it's
How you doing,
9:30.
Joe?
So I'd like to call meeting to order. Fly Quiet Committee meeting Tuesday, October 27th, 2020. Zoom teleconference, 9:30 a.m. Jeanette, can you do the roll call?
Yes. Bensonville,
Here.
City of Chicago 39th Ward,
Here.
Des Plaines,
Here.
Elmhurst,
Here.
Harwood Heights, Niles,
Here?
Park Ridge,
Here.
River Grove,
Here.
Schaumburg,
Here.
Schiller Park,
Here.
and Wooddale.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Okay, very good. Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes? Anybody have any? If not, let's have a roll call vote for the approval of the September 22nd, 2020 Fly Quiet Committee meeting minutes.
Bensonville,
Yes.
City of Chicago 39th Ward,
Yes.
Des Plaines,
Yes.
Elmhurst,
Yes.
Harwood Heights, Niles,
Yes.
Park Ridge,
Yes.
River Grove,
Yes.
Schaumburg,
Yes.
Schiller Park,
Yes.
and Wooddale.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, very good. All right, it's going to turn into the Aaron Ryan show again for a while.
Okay.
Interim Fly Quiet, the report. Ryan?
Morning, everyone. We've got weeks 29 through 33 of the interim Fly Quiet reports to show you. Let me just pull those up here. Everyone see that?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so as you remember, and you should know, we resumed IFQ Part 2, as we call it, on the evening of September 13th. And we have reports to go over for weeks 29 through 33. For week 29, it was a east-west week with the primary configuration, 9 right departures and 10 left arrivals. We were only able to achieve 30% utilization due to a number of factors this week. Unfortunately, we had flight checks as well as some construction impacts that caused us to have to close some of our designated runways. The backside of the reports lay out the metrics and numbers for each night of the week. As you can see, we were primarily in east flow for the week, so we should have been using our primary configuration, which was an east flow configuration. But we did have several nights where we had construction and flight checks that limited our ability to use those runways. Week 30, we rotate to the crosswind runways, with the primary being 4 left departures and 4 right arrivals. Again, only 25% utilization. We had safety inspections that, of course, that we have to do every night, as well as flight checks again on the nights of September 20th and the 21st, which greatly reduced our ability to use those runways during the week. As you can see, the winds were west flow 100% for the week. So we were in primarily our secondary configuration when we were able to go into it. Week 31, we're back to the east-west runways this time. Primary 10 left departures, 10 center arrivals, and much better utilization. 86% of the operation utilized those 2 runways during Fly Quiet. As you can see, and I failed to note this on the previous reports, but you can see the average start and stop times are much earlier and later than we usually see. Obviously, the low operation levels allow us to go into flight quiet mode much earlier and much later than we typically do before. But for week 31, we did have a bit of navigational maintenance on one of our runways that restricted full use of the runways during the week. We were 93% west flow, so we were primarily doing our secondary configuration in the week, which was departures on 28 right and arrivals on 28 center. Week 32, rotating back to the crosswinds, primary departing 4 left, arriving 4 right, 36% utilization of those runways for the week, average start time of 10 p.m. and stop time of 6:57 a.m. And on the backside, we do have, you can see west flow and east flow is pretty much split for the week. And so we were split kind of on which configurations, either the primary or secondary. And then week 33, back to the east-west runways with primary arrival runway 27 left and departure runway 28 center. Only 50%, or I'm sorry, 49% utilization of those runways for this week of October 11th. We had an average start time of exactly 10 p.m. And stop time of 6:49 a.m. We did have, again, some construction and also inclement weather. It's actually interesting, on the night of October 17th, we had extremely strong winds out of the south, which resulted in the airport having to use the crosswind runways majority of the day and into the night. So a little bit of a twist where we were actually, the airport was actually forced by winds into those crosswind runways and not able to use the designated east-west runways for that evening. But as you can see, primarily west flow for the week. So our primary configuration was used pretty much 100% of the time. And that completes the weekly reports for weeks 29 through 33.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Not having any questions?
I have a question, Joe, sorry.
Oh, there was a question? I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Dan.
Ryan, taking into account the second period and the first IFQ period, do we have much indication as to how often unfavorable winds prevent the use of the 422s? Is it more frequent in the winter?
I don't know off the top of my head, but that's something that we can definitely look at. As far as when winds alone would cause us not to be able to use the crosswind runways. That's something we can look at in IFQ Part 1. Yeah.
Okay. And I guess the reason for the question is to understand what would happen in Fly Quiet 21, where we only have one long runway designated, whether that would be suitable for both arrivals and departures in those conditions to maintain predictability. Whereas we've dropped mixed use configurations from prior tests, so the FAA didn't find them favorable.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, we can definitely look at that and give some feedback.
Any other questions? If not, I have to do something that's technical at the moment. I noticed I never asked for a motion in a second to approve the minutes. Just so for the record, somebody want to make a motion to approve the
I'll
minutes?
move so.
Anybody second? All right, thank you. Sorry about that. All right. Item 5, Fly Quiet 21 process discussion.
Okay, as we're all familiar with this slide, we are still in the developing and approving alternatives phase of the process. However, I think today we're going to be able to kind of move forward from this box here to the next box and start reviewing and revising alternatives. So my
Hey,
suggestion.
Brian, we can't see we just see the cover slide. Or is that just me?
No, it says it's paused. How about now?
Nope.
How about now?
No, yeah, there we
Oh,
go.
there it is.
Oh.
Now it's gone.
All right, let me come back here. Are we good?
There we are.
Yeah, that looks familiar.
Okay, sorry about that. As I was saying, we're still in the development of alternatives phase, but I think we have kind of gotten our hands around all the possible alternatives as far as big picture concepts that are feasible. And so I think the goal of this committee right now is to take a look at all those alternatives and then try to narrow it down to a few that we can start to review and revise to get to a point where the committee is comfortable with a preferred alternative that they would like to move forward to the full commission.
Hey, Ryan, point of order on that. Can you clarify, are we looking today to achieve consensus or approval of one alternative or several alternatives?
If I could just step in, it depends how the meeting goes, but I don't see us doing that today. But I do see this discussion at the beginning develop so that if it's possible, maybe we can do it today. And if not, we'll just do it at the next meeting.
So do you think we'll be, when you say if it's possible, do you think we'll be taking votes today? Do you envision that as the goal of the meeting?
Evan,
No,
I would
I would say that's a nice goal to try to achieve, but it may not be possible because there's going to be a general discussion, and I'm going to ask one of the members to make a motion to approve a particular alternative. Okay, and then there'll be a discussion on that, and then a vote on that particular alternative.
Chairman, good morning.
It probably will not happen today.
Chairman, good morning. It's Aaron.
Yeah.
I do not recommend that you take a vote today. We are reviewing alternatives, which the committee is going to see for the first time. And if you are just now seeing them for the first time, I do not recommend that you take votes today.
Okay, Aaron, thanks. Committee, you've heard what Aaron feels. So, but we got to keep the thing going, Aaron. So we got to leave the option open if the committee so chooses. That's all. Like I said, I don't expect it to happen today, but I want it out there. Because if somebody, for instance, if somebody makes a motion and the rest of the committee decides they don't want to do it, then nobody seconds it, and then we just continue. That's all. But I just want the options out there. Okay. All right. Where are we?
Oh, if I could just say something real quick.
Yeah.
And just agreement with Aaron that we're seeing some of these for the same time. And I guess what we were hoping is to define the process on which we would select these. And I think it's a fairly straightforward task just to define some key priorities of the committee into a matrix and then eliminate the ones that don't meet those key priorities, as opposed to making a quick decision on any of these alternatives.
All right, Dan, and if you feel that's the way to do it, you can make a motion.
I can't make a motion, unfortunately.
All right, so that then we can have a discussion about that, as opposed to just because I just don't want this to be like willy-nilly. I want to make sure that everything we do is focused in terms of a motion.
Sure.
So, Chairman,
I can make a motion on that. I think that's the right way to proceed.
real quick, Chairman, I've had discussions with some members of the Fly Quiet Committee. I think we'll be in a position today to eliminate some of these alternatives. And maybe we start through elimination, we start narrowing down on preferred alternatives. So I could foresee that being a goal today.
Okay. So what we have is Dan's motion first at some time in the future, and then, yeah, okay.
Chairman, Dan is not a member of the committee. He's
I'll make the motion.
Okay. Malcolm made the motion.
So Chairman, it's Aaron. There's a motion on the floor. What's the motion?
No, there is no motion yet. We were just discussing
made
how.
a motion.
No, we were just, nobody has made a formal motion yet. We're talking about procedure. We got to finish look, this is what I perceive. I'll say it again, okay? What Malcolm just said was that he'd be willing to make the motion, as far as I'm concerned, when the time comes. We're not there yet because we still got to hear what Ryan has to say. All right?
Understood.
Okay.
Okay, so
Ryan.
let me try and circle back here and re-clarify what I think would be a good path forward as far as the process. I think first step is we review all of these alternatives, and from there try and narrow down, whether that be today or the next meeting, whatever this committee feels comfortable with. Try and narrow down the alternatives to a few, 1, 2, or 3. And then from there, we're able to spend some time on refining those, what we refer to as the preferred alternatives, and really get into more detail on the runway headings, the schedules, and a lot of kind of the feedback that we've gotten so far. Once we get to a point where we think we've refined it to the best that we can, then the committee is comfortable to bring it to a vote to select one preferred alternative to bring to the full commission for a vote. So does that kind of make sense as a process forward?
That's fine. That's fine.
And again, I'm not, whether it's whatever this committee is comfortable, when those votes are happening is up to this committee. So again, just kind of the decisions, that have been made and still need to make. Like I mentioned, we've established the goals and the criteria. We've made a decision on RNAVs, at least to include them in some alternatives at this point. Now we're looking to approve alternatives to move forward for refinement, ultimately for committee recommendation and ONCC approval. There's a lot of different components, as we've discussed. Some of these components we'll get into more details as we reduce the number of alternatives down to a few for refinement. And with that, Mr. Chair, I would like to move on to item, I believe it's 6.
Okay.
Which is the actual alternatives. So again, this slide is just our assumptions when we're showing our alternatives graphically, especially when it comes to the departure procedures. Again, it's just a graphic representation using LMAX contours for those departure headings. And none of our assumptions have changed since the last time you've seen them. So between the last meeting and now, we've gotten a lot of great feedback from committee members as well as other members of the ONCC. We've gotten what I'm going to split into 2 groups. We've gotten modifications and recommendations to the existing alternatives that we have gone over, alternatives B, C, D, and E. And as well as brand new alternatives that we're going to call alternatives F, G, and H. And these alternatives are kind of a combination of specific ones that were submitted, as well as a collation of recommendations from other committee members. And we also had one alternative that was rejected because it did not meet the ONCC criteria. So we're going to be going over, again, alternatives B, C, D, E, and then new alternatives F, G, and H. And so in the end, we'll have 7 alternatives to deliberate. Does anybody have questions about alternative feedback and new alternatives at this point? Okay. So alternative B. Nothing has changed in regards to the alternative itself. Again, we had a lot of good recommendations and feedbacks on modifications to this alternative, which I'm going to table if this alternative moves forward as something to continue to be refined. The next meetings will have include those refinements and suggestions that we got from committee feedback. But just as a reminder and kind of just go over the highlights of the alternative itself, it is a 12-week rotation that rotates 6 configurations. The main concept here is the north isolating operations to the north airfield and to the south airfield. So we'll rotate not only east-west, but also north-south. This alternative incorporates vector headings, 2 for each departure runway that will be rotated week to week. And it is rotates 8 east-west weeks and 4 crosswind weeks. Now, one of the things we have done differently since the last time you saw this is we've added a designated long runway pairing for each configuration for all 12 weeks, and we've done this for all the alternatives. This is based on the FAA feedback we've gotten to date. And so the idea here is to give you some sense of which long runway might be used during those weeks if necessary. We've also color coded each configuration, so you'll be able to visually better identify those weeks where the configuration comes up again in the schedule. And so this is our rotation schedule where we show all 6 configurations rotated through the 12-week period. Some of the changes we've made since the last time you've seen this again is we've added the configuration name to each week to help better identify specific configurations. We've also highlighted the designated long runway that is paired with each of those configurations for each week. Page 12 is the overview of the entire alternative. As you can see, we've got all of the configurations as well as the departure contours and arrival contours. Again, this is a 12-week configuration, and it is 6 weeks, 12 weeks rotating 6 configurations. Again, the north isolating air traffic to the north and versus the south, rotating week to week, as well as east to west. Okay, I'm sorry, did someone have a question before I move on?
I think Dan has, yeah. Dan, you have a comment on B?
Yeah, Ryan, if you could go back to the slide that shows just the 12-week rotation. Yeah, I just want to make a comment and something we observe now that we've somewhat solidified the concept of long runway pairings in the crosswind configurations. And I just want to point out to the committee weeks 3 and 6. And it seems the preference, throughout this process has been to maintain the predictability in both primary and secondary configurations, such that when the wind reverses, the impacts don't change by quadrant. And that holds up on the parallel pairings. But with the long runway pairings for the 422s, if you note in weeks 3 and 6, which are sort of the secondary for each other, the long runway pairing will switch airfields. And to us, that's something worth considering, whether, given the volume of aircraft that we know requests not just a long departure runway, but a long arrival runway, how that impacts your desire for predictability. And so as we review some of these alternatives, I guess we just ask to keep that in mind so that we can have that as perhaps part of a discussion in the refinements. Thank you.
Okay. I think that's the only question we had for comment.
Chairman, Evan here. This is for CDA. Has there been any movement on CDA's appetite for closing runways?
Yes, so we have had active discussions internally as well as with airline representatives, positive discussions on the long runway issue. And that is something that we're getting good progress on. The discussions we've had so far have been that the vast majority, as we predicted, the vast majority of operations can be accommodated on either the north airfield or the south airfield if we were to isolate those operations. And the discussions still need to continue, but we feel, and the CDA feels, that if the Fly Quiet program were to have weeks where we close runways on the south airfield, we think that can be supported.
So that's huge news, right? I think that's a big step forward, and I really appreciate everyone working on that.
Yes, and again, just to clarify, we still have more discussions to have, but the initial discussions have been very positive.
Good. Okay. That's pretty meaningful.
Yeah.
All right, you want to continue, Ryan, or any other questions?
Yeah, let me just, I lost my,
Hey, this is Ron. Can I ask one quick clarifying question about the long runway?
Yes, go on.
So yeah, we've talked about the long runway more on the focus of departures, but for an arrival that needs a longer runway, would FAA air traffic want to use the same runway that they're using for the long departures, or would they use the adjacent parallel?
well, I think our thought is that these would be, not consistent or not several operations at the same time. So we would use the same runway. So we don't see that there would be any need to use a different runway for a arrival request versus a departure request.
Okay, and one other option on that, the long runways that would be used for departures, do they have the appropriate equipment on it that they can handle the same arrivals that the arrival runway would, is like Cat 1, Cat 2, Cat 3, et cetera?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure that, all of the operations would, that's kind of specific to the airline and the equipment type. So I guess I'm not sure about that specific answer yet. That's something we'd have to look at.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
Continue, Ryan.
Yep. I also want to note, we've also added the blue kind of runway labels here to help identify those long runways from week to week.
Okay.
So C, alternative C, is we've made no changes again to alternative C. The big difference between B and C is that we've included RNAV departure procedures for the crosswind runways. Again, we've added the long runways pairings for each of the configurations, but it is pretty much the same as alternative B. The only major difference is the RNAV heading for the crosswinds. And we have our week-to-week schedule, as well as the overview of our 12-week rotation. Again, alternative C is the isolating traffic to the north, rotating to the south, as well as east and west, and the crosswinds, vectors on the east-west runways, and RNAV on the crosswind runways. Alternative D was one of the next alternative. The major difference was that this alternative used both arrival runway and a departure runway on the north and south airfield. So there was no isolation of traffic to the north or south. This was what we call utilizing the full airfield on the schedule. This also had 10 configurations versus 6, 12-week rotation. We had one heading only for the east-west configurations and 2 headings for our crosswind configurations. And this is it laid out over the 12 weeks. The overview, again, 12 weeks rotation utilizing 10 configurations, full airfield. So we're not isolating or rotating north versus south airfield. It is utilizing, as you can see in week 1, a departure on the north airfield and arrival on the south. And so each week we would rotate east flow and west flow, but not north versus south. And the crosswind runways have vector headings, not RNAV in this alternative. Alternative E is the same as D, except we include RNAV for the crosswind runways. So again, the same configurations, the same rotation schedule, the same headings, except for the crosswind runways, where we would use a RNAV procedure versus a vector heading. So alternative E is similar to D, but with vector heading, RNAV on the crosswinds versus vector headings. Okay, our first new alternative is alternative F. It utilizes 6 configurations rotated over a 6-week period. This one, similar to alternatives D and E, utilize the full airfield. So we are not rotating North Airfield versus South Airfield, specific week to week, but within the schedule configurations. This alternative utilizes vector headings and only 1 heading per configuration. So no RNAV in this alternative. And it alternates 4 east-west weeks and 2 crosswind weeks. And so you can see this laid out for the configurations over the 6-week schedule. And the idea here was to give the first 3 weeks, the departures would turn at least to the north or west. And the second 3 weeks, the departures would head to the south. And you can see how this configuration lays out. Again, only single departure headings for each runway, utilizing the 25-degree turn for each of those departure headings. 6 weeks with only utilizing 6 configurations. And so we have 4 east-west weeks and 2 crosswind weeks.
Chairman, this is one of those examples I think would be one that we could probably vote down. So if we wanted to work on eliminating something, I think alternative F would be a great candidate.
Dan has his hand raised.
Yeah, if I could just point out some things with F and some of the key differences from what we've seen in the prior configurations is there isn't any constraint on full-length runway departures for the South Airfield, whereas all the priors with the North-South Airfield, even though our hope is that that'll be the norm, the FAA's language still is only when operationally necessary. And the other thing is, in part, it ties into full-length runway departures, is minimizing population overlap, particularly with the South Airfield that does tend to get overutilized, that having that full-length runway we think will be important in further discussions when we look at not just the altitude of the departures, but where they actually fly. So we think it's important to keep full airfield in the discussion, at least to the point where we get to drilling down deeper in the headings.
Chairman, if I can weigh in?
Yes, Karen, I'm sorry.
So my concern with this configuration is that based on the reports Ryan showed us earlier in this meeting, the winds are unpredictable. And so if you look at like weeks 1 and 2, if in week 1 we have to go to our secondary configuration, you have 2 weeks of consecutive impacts then for the residents, because week 1 and week 2 are each other's primary and secondary configurations. And so I just have concerns that while on paper, this does look to sort of achieve our goals of minimizing how many residents are impacted kind of geographically, that in reality, we know that we have pretty significant seasonal shifts of winds and that you could end up with a scenario where people are experiencing 2 weeks of consecutive impacts, just given kind of the limited rotation that's being proposed.
Joe, if I could respond to that, and I think part of it is the way unintentionally this is formatted. The secondary carrying to week 1 is actually week 4, which does not change quadrants. In the same way, week 2, the secondary is actually week 5. So similar to alternative B, the parallels mirror image each other. So that we don't see as an issue, if that makes sense. We haven't drawn these with their secondary configurations. We did in some of the earlier discussions, but there is no change there. And if you were to actually take alternative B, strip out the 0 and 10 degree headings, when you look at the graphical overlay here, you basically have alternative F.
So
So the
Chairman,
distinction primarily is full airfield.
can
Ron,
I
do you have a question?
I think that, as Dan,
Karen?
I'm sorry. Karen, did you have something that you wanted to say in
I
response?
guess I just had a question for Land Bound or CDA. I mean so Dan, thank you for the clarification. I guess that's a departure from how we've always handled the secondary configurations before. And I just want to make sure that it seemed like it was easy for air traffic to know that they just sort of flipped, right? Whether it was east, west, or crosswind runways. And so I guess my question is just, is that something that air traffic is going to be comfortable with in having secondary configurations that aren't sort of that mirror image of the primary?
Well, yeah, so that you're correct. You know, it's maybe something that ideally it would be the same runways, so that to avoid, you know, kind of a lot more workload for air traffic when they're, you know, having to change a configuration based on wind. So ideally it would be the same runways. But that is something, you know, we chose not to show the secondary configurations on all these alternatives because we thought it might be just, you know, way too much information to digest. But that is something that we will and should get into as we refine each of these alternatives if they move forward.
Mr. Chairman, having heard the discussion regarding this configuration, the lack of variety of airfield as well as consecutive impact question, I'd make a motion to eliminate alternative F from consideration.
Do I hear a second?
I'll second the motion.
Any discussion? If there's no discussion, we have a vote.
Chairman, I have
Yeah,
hand raised from Ernie, Ron, and Cynthia.
Oh, I didn't see that. Okay, I asked Ron before, but he didn't respond. Okay, Ron, you're first. Ron?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now, yeah.
Okay, so just to build on the consecutive impacts, not only with the alternatives for when the wind changes, but if you look at weeks 4 and 5, you have it basically on the same pair of parallels, but just going in opposite directions. And the parallels are so close together that just because you have an arrival one week and a departure the next, there's going to be a large portion of the population that's still going to hear both of those operations. So you can't really look at that as being not doing consecutive impacts because the parallels are just too close together. So if you look at week 4, they're arriving on 10 center and departing on 10 left. And then the next week on week 5, it looks like they're arriving on 28 right and departing on 28 center. So there's still going to be consecutive impacts off of both ends of that runways for 2 weeks.
Okay. Remember, I just want to remind everybody there's a motion on the floor, so keep your discussion to that motion. All right, Ernie, you're next. Ernie?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Ron actually just covered what I was going to discuss. I assume that the highlighted blue is the designated long runway in each of these particular weeks. Is that correct, Ryan?
That is correct, yeah.
Okay, then that would speak to the issue of not only consecutive impacts, but impacting certain communities at perhaps what could be classified as an onerous rate. So I would be in concurrence with other committee members that we could eliminate alternative F.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Ernie. And Jeanette, there was one more person that had their hand raised.
We have Cynthia.
Okay, Cynthia? Cynthia, you there? I'm counting to 3, Cynthia. Okay, you lost your opportunity. I'm sorry.
Uh-oh.
Oh, there she is. Cynthia?
I'm sorry, I was muting on my phone. I didn't realize I was muted on the computer as well. I would echo the consecutive impacts on the alternate long runways as being completely unacceptable to the SOC communities. This alternative really does not give relief. We're not in support of north airfield use and south airfield use in consecutive weeks either when you're combining the use of both. We by far prefer the alternatives where we can isolate operations to the north or isolate them to the south because we get true relief to those residents in either the north or the south.
Okay, thank you. Any other discussion on the motion?
There's Alderman Dunn.
Alderman?
Yes, thank you. I just want to make a quick comment. I understand the consecutive impact issue, and I think one thing that this does is reducing the departures to 1 versus 2. It assists in removing some of that consecutive community impact. So I do like that concept, but I do also agree that the north south separating that airfield has benefits with consecutive impact. So I just wanted to point out those particular points.
All right, thank you, Alderman. Dan, you have another comment?
Yeah, there are a couple things here that aren't really being portrayed accurately. First of all, as far as the consecutive impacts from week 1 to 2 in the proximity to those runways, whether it's arrival, departure, I just want to note alternative B has the exact same situation. So whether it's north-south airfield or full airfield, that does not change. And also just point out these long runway pairings in weeks 1 and 2 are good examples. And the reason these were designated is not even necessarily long runway, but alternates. Obviously in week 1 and 2, where you have 10 left 28R, the chances of that being utilized are slim, with the exception that if you do have a reason that, for example, 9C is unavailable, runway maintenance, whatever, you have an adjacent runway that's in the same quadrant and hence maintain predictability on arrivals. The second thing that isn't indicated and probably would occur in a further discussion is how you handle departure headings on what we're calling the alternate runway, which would also turn back into the designated quadrant. So looking at what benchmarks we'd hope to look at or have the committee look at as far as predictability, equity, and sustainability, we still think there are some key points on predictability that are being missed here. So it's ultimately up to the committee, but I ultimately also think we're going to end up circling back around to some of these predictability issues and perhaps regret not having other options on the table.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Ernie, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wonder if the committee would benefit from knowing where these new proposals are coming from.
Well, like I mentioned at the beginning, I wouldn't say that there's one particular community that submitted these. These do kind of take into consideration feedback that we've gotten from multiple. So I guess I don't know if I would say that this is, you know, one person submitted this alternative or committee.
Thank you. Thank you for the clarification. I appreciate it.
Cynthia? Cynthia?
Hello?
Yes.
I apologize. I just need to respond to Dan's comments on B and C. If you, on the alternative long runway, Ryan, if you would go to that slide, and we put this in our letter to Chairman Annunzio and Landerman Brown. If you switch weeks 4 and 5 and 10 and 11, you can cure the consecutive impact of the long alternate runway in both configurations B and C. So that's an important issue. You can get B and C with adjustments to eliminate consecutive impacts even on the alternative long runways.
Thank you, Cynthia. And that's an important point. And as Ryan pointed out, refinements on these are yet to occur. This is drawn for simplicity within alternating east-west flow. That is not a requirement. That is just to make it as clear as possible for demonstration purposes. So those tweaks are available to all the configurations, I think is an important point to make.
Alderman Dunn.
Chairman, this conversation's gone rather off topic. There is a motion on the floor.
We got one more comment. Alderman Dunn, you got something to say?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, how many more new alternatives are we going to discuss? Because I think would be premature to start throwing alternatives out before we went through all the ones that were proposed to be discussed. And to me, it sounds like there might be
we have 2 more
some bias in what's proposed here if we're eliminating an alternative before we see them all. We have 2 more? Okay, I would suggest that we take a look at the other 2 before we eliminate this. I would suggest we vote against this motion.
All right. Are you going to make a motion to table this discussion until the other alternatives? Alderman? Alderman, are you going to make a motion to table this discussion on the motion?
Yes, I would make a motion to do that, to table that, but it's up to those that have presented the motion.
I'll second it. Malcolm Chester from Des Plaines.
All right, we're going to have to call the. We're going to have to find out whether we're going to table this discussion until the other alternatives. Jeanette, you want to do the roll?
Yes, Bensenville,
No.
City of Chicago 39th Ward.
I'm sorry, are we voting on tabling motion?
Yes.
Yes, I vote to table.
Des Plaines,
Yes.
Elmhurst,
Yes.
Harwood Heights, Niles,
Yes.
Park Ridge,
No.
River Grove,
Yes.
Schaumburg,
No.
Schiller Park,
Yes.
and Wooddale.
No.
What do we got, Jeanette?
The motion is tabled.
Okay. All right, we're going to go right back to it after we hear the other alternatives. Go back to this motion. All right? Continue, please.
Yeah, I'm hearing a really bad echo. So if you're not speaking, could you please mute yourself? Thank you. Alternative G is our next new alternative. It is a 12-week rotation utilizing 8 configurations. Some of these configurations we have not seen before in an alternative. They're what I'll refer to as our hybrid alternatives, such as GG, FF, II, and HH, utilizing a crosswind runway with an east-west runway. It again is an alternative that does not isolate runways to the north or south airfield. It utilizes 1 north and 1 south runway for each configuration. This does 1 heading per configuration. It is vector headings. This one does not, just let me make sure. Yeah, this little typo here. This is just vector headings. It does not include RNAV. It is 8 weeks of east-west runways and 4 weeks of what we're referring to as hybrid runways. Again, here you'll see the rotation schedule from week to week over the 12-week period. And again, rotating east flow and west flow, paired then with a hybrid week. You'll see GG here with arrivals on 22 right and departures on 28 center. The overview for alternative G, again, rotating week to week, a north airfield runway and south airfield runway, east flow to west flow. The hybrid configurations are used, which may be limited in their ability to be used, as we've discussed before. And vector headings for the runways, greater than 10 degrees. So these are all 25-degree turns that we're showing for vector headings. No RNAV. So the big thing. So
Any comments? Dan, you have a comment? And then Karen?
Yes, thanks, Joe. Ryan, if you could just back up to the 12-week configuration, it's a little easier to illustrate. And I think just one of the key points we want the committee to take away from this, and this is something we mentioned earlier, in all these prior configurations, whenever we put in the crosswind weeks with the long runway pairings, the crosswind weeks are not mirror images of each other. So essentially, in a 12-week rotation, every third week, you completely lose predictability on the parallels. You can have north or south airfield depending on the wind direction. And from our standpoint, when people look at a schedule, they want to see predictability in all weather and not have to look at the wind direction. So what the solution is to that, I don't think we know. We were hoping to have a further discussion on that. What we'd like to point out on this, and the purpose of bringing hybrids into at least the discussion, is if you note on weeks GG and FF, in those cases, the crosswind or hybrid weeks are mirror images. Long runway designation does not change, and the same with II and HH. So I guess we're looking for feedback from the members and the other consultants as to how they plan to handle the crosswind weeks, given the low utilization of the 422s in these prior configurations, to really give people the predictability they're looking for. Thank you.
All right. Cynthia, our technical expert from the city, is telling us that it might be your microphone that's causing the feedback. So if you could mute yourself when you're not speaking. Thanks, Cynthia.
Karen, I think you had a question.
Yes, Karen's next.
Yeah, so I mean, I think Dan brings up a good point that as we get into refinement, we are going to have to tackle what the long runway means for consecutive impacts. But the other thing I think we have to keep in mind is that the solution isn't necessarily worse than the problem. And I have some concerns with the hybrid configurations based on previous tests. The other concern I have with this alternative is that, Brian, can you go to the next slide that shows the airfield? I mean, if you're, Bensonville, Wooddale, or Park Ridge, you have flight paths that are like directly overlapping with no separation whatsoever. And so I think this just doesn't really appear to accomplish kind of that geographic dispersion as well as some of the other alternatives. And so, I think that, it just is problematic for certain communities who would bear more of the noise impacts than others based on the way this lays out.
Karen, if I could just respond on that. What's illustrated here, and you make a good point, that the visual does change because we've taken some of those long runway pairings and made them primary. But when we get further in this process, and this is true even with B, you're going to see some of this as well if we weight the long runway requests as significant impacts, particularly the South Airfield where the FAA has a preference for 10C for departures. That's what this is here. So alternative B has the same. We just haven't gotten to that point of the discussion. And there is a very valid discussion as to how we weight in those crosswind weeks, those long runway requests, because it is true, every time you put in one of those crosswind weeks, and this is a good visual of that, it does weigh things to that southwest and northeast quadrant. Now, in this case, all the long runway requests, in this case, those are primary impacts, but all the long runway requests occur in the other two quadrants, which we aren't illustrating because we haven't gotten to that point of the discussion yet. So that is an important discussion, and ultimately we should be laying these graphical lobes for all those, whether they're primary or alternate requests. So again, this is another situation where perhaps options are being limited early in the discussion before we've allowed CDA and Landom and Brown to get to the point of giving us these other visual elements that would help with the decision process.
Chairman, I take umbrage with that comment. We are beating this like a dead horse. It's clear that in the steps that we're going to go through, that we're going to review and refine in the next step. So we're trying to identify alternatives now. We'll review and refine later. So what Dan just said is patently untrue.
Well, I don't, you sure you want to be that strong? It's his opinion. It's Dan's opinion. Thank you, Dan.
No, his statement was false.
Okay.
I guess, Joe, I guess I don't understand the hostility. We've all been at this table for 5 years. We've all offered input, and I just don't understand why things don't want to be looked at, other than just an unwillingness to consider anything other than what's been preferred for the last 2 years. And I honestly don't think it'll serve the committee well or the residents.
Okay. Well, Dan, that's your opinion. Evan's got his opinion, and it's the committee's going to decide.
Joe, can I speak? Malcolm Chester.
There was somebody before you, I believe.
Okay, I'll wait.
Done. Alderman, did you have a question or comment?
Alderman Dunn has his hand raised, then Cynthia and Ron as well.
Okay.
No, I'm sorry, I don't have my hand raised.
You're going to be next, all right? Alderman Dunn?
He doesn't have his hand raised.
Oh, he didn't have.
I'm good, Joe, thanks.
Okay.
Cynthia?
Ernie?
I have mine raised on the time.
All right, hold on a second. This is going to be, you're all going to get a chance to talk, all right? It's going to be Ernie, Malcolm, and then Cynthia.
Mr. Chair, I have no comments at this time.
Okay, Malcolm?
Well, my only thought is on these new things, I would like to see them tested. And the reason I would like to see an alternative like this tested is we have such low usage during when we have both of the other runways, the cross runways. So it just makes sense to me that we should see how this works in utilization, because our utilization is so low on the cross runways. And we're looking at different configurations now, which may result in much larger utilization. So that would be my only thought. In terms of impact on us, I don't know if there's a great difference, but this might encourage more reliability on the configurations. That would be my only point.
Okay, thank you. Cynthia?
Okay, Ryan, can you go to the previous slide?
God damn, fucking.
I just want everybody to look at weeks 3 through 6 and the consecutive impacts that the southern parallel communities are going to be suffering, both in the primary runway and the alternate long runway. That's 4 weeks of consistent uses of 10 left, 28 right, which is wholly unacceptable. It's a criteria that we've established with this program The hybrid configurations we abandoned quite some time ago. They're complex. They add more workload to the air traffic controllers to be able to manage these. If you look at configuration GG, you have converging runway operations on 22 right and departures on 28C. We are backstepping with these alternatives and visiting issues that we put to bed a long time ago. The idea that we can test a hybrid configuration will take another year. We could do that, but it would require another test rotation, another EIS. It is time to get serious about what we know works and what we know does not work. And, from SOC standpoint, alternative F and G do not work.
Okay, thank you, Cynthia. All
Joe,
right, if there's any other discussion, let's continue.
Joe, can I just make one more point?
Sure.
So I agree with Cynthia. I think we've gotten the feedback previously that moving for more tests is not an option. We've tested a lot of this. We need to take, we were graciously given 3 tests, and we need to take the information that we learned from those 3 tests and apply them. And it's time to move forward. And while I understand that Dan would like to do more and more analysis, and I do think that further discussion and refinement will be beneficial to all of us. There's also the public component of this, and if we make this plan too nuanced and overanalyzed, it can be difficult for the public to understand. And at the end of the day, that's a significant part of what we're trying to accomplish here, is to develop a plan that the public can understand and then relate to what that means for their daily lives. And I just worry that if we get too far in the weeds of weighting things and overanalyzing things, that when it comes back to all of us to explain to our constituents what we did and why we did it, if I'm Park Ridge, Ernie, if I'm you in this scenario, and this is the map that your residents see, no amount of explaining is going to convince them that they're not getting twice the impacts of everyone else. And so I think that that's an important component that we need to be factoring in as well.
Okay, thank you, Karen. Dan has a comment, then I'd like to close this discussion so we can move on. Because we're going to have a chance to discuss this again when we make the motion to eliminate this alternative.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. And I'll just wrap it up. Just to follow up on Cynthia's point on consecutive impacts. Again, it's important to point out that the order of these configurations is not something that was intended to be finalized in this iteration. And just as alternative B has gone through some iterations to try and mitigate consecutive impacts, any of these configurations can benefit from the same process. Specific to alternative G, I think we're getting hung up on these lobes, and where they appear to overlap, alternative B has the same issues. We just haven't necessarily drawn them in this manner. And just to speak to the idea of hybrid configurations, or just in general pairings of short and long runways, if you review the test data, those in fact receive some of the highest utilization, not the lowest utilization. And actually some of the lowest utilization we received, goes back to test 1, where you had parallel configurations that introduced ground conflicts. And I think we still have some issues with alternative B that we haven't fully resolved as to what ground conflicts mean for utilization. So our thought on this process is, and we understand Evan's urgency to move things forward, but the intent wasn't to have modeling and tests of all this, but to allow Landerman Brown to continue with sort of the lesson plan they had, and then see what configurations meet that. The process is sort of being done in reverse. Rather than letting the process define the plan, we're finding a plan and then sort of defining the process. And I guess in that aspect, we think the process is backwards. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. If we can move on now.
Okay, so we have one more alternative to show you. That is alternative H. This alternative is a 16-week rotation that rotates 6 configurations. It goes back to the concept of isolating operations on the north or south airfield and rotating north to south as well as east to west. This alternative incorporates the crosswind configurations multiple times to even out the number of weeks that we are in east-west runways versus crosswind runways. This has vector headings. Again, sorry for the typo. This is only vector headings, not RNAV. And it is 2 headings for the crosswind weeks, but only 1 heading for the east-west weeks. Again, so the alternative H, the concept is alternating north airfield and south airfield, east and west flows, as well as incorporating even number of crosswind weeks versus east-west weeks. And due to the number of iterations, we had to split the rotation schedule into 2 slides. So we have weeks 1 through 8. And again, it's basically a mirror image of weeks 9 through 16. It just gets duplicated again. And again, it's the north-south crosswind kind of iteration. Here you can see the overview. Again, it is 16 weeks of scheduled runways, utilizing 6 different configurations, 4 east-west configurations and 2 crosswind configurations, scheduled so that there are an even number, 8 weeks of east-west configurations and 8 weeks of crosswind configurations. The airfield is isolated to north and south, as well as vector headings versus RNAV. And the vector headings are single off the east-west and 2 vector headings off the crosswinds.
Okay, any questions?
We have Cynthia and then Dan.
Okay, Cynthia and then Dan.
Okay, so this configuration in SOC's opinion is the only configuration that meet all of the criteria required that we voted on quite some time ago. A couple of concepts here are really important. We've heard a lot about predictability. The most important factor, I believe, and I think what we've seen in the past regarding predictability is keeping things simple. This configuration schedule does that. It alternates north to south, east to west, and crosswind runways. It isolates operations when we're in north or south configuration to one side of the airfield so that air traffic has only one area of operation to monitor while runway maintenance and snow removal are occurring throughout the night. It's simple. There's one vector assigned off each runway, and in this scenario, that vector is a little bit offset from the arrival stream, giving a little bit of relief there to those people that live under both those streams. And if you look at the 16 weeks, the alternate long runway also alternates from north to south every week, fairly giving that opposite side of the airfield complete relief at night. I will note one thing that we noted in our letter to ONCC, and that is ignoring consecutive week impacts over arrivals. Alternatives D and E send departures over the opposite airfield arrivals in almost every week. And if CDA and Linderman Brown have rated that as not a consecutive impact. And so if that's the case, then we would not consider it a consecutive impact in alternative H. Now, if you want to revise how you're evaluating that and say that we're not going to allow consecutive impacts over previous night arrival streams, then we need to look at H and D&E and see how to resolve those.
Okay.
Oh, I would like to get in the queue, please.
Who is that?
That's Malcolm. I'd like to get in the queue on this one. This one stirs
Okay.
a lot of emotion with me.
Okay. First Dan and then Malcolm.
Thank you, Joe. First, Ryan, just a question, and maybe Cynthia could answer this as well. Why are the weeks repeated twice? Don't really see a distinction. Everything seems to be accomplished in the first 8 weeks.
I think our interpretation was that the pulling it out to 16 weeks gave an opportunity to get more of dispersion of the east and west flow with the crosswinds if you were only to do it in 8 weeks, but that's an interpretation.
Okay. And then just some comments, if I can, and just pointing out some of the previous critiques on what we were trying to avoid with some of the prior configurations. Consecutive impacts without enough separation between the two airfields. Obviously, that occurs in week 1 and 2 in this, as well as some of the others. But more importantly, when you get to these duplicating the crosswind weeks, what we know from all the configurations is every time you put in that crosswind week, since requests for long runways for departures are preferred, you're loading up that southwest and northeast quadrant in consecutive weeks. And also you've lost the predictability because again, weeks 3 and week 4 do not have a mirror image. So every time the wind shifts, so does the predictability of that long runway. And then just looking at this dispersion in some of the criteria intent that the committee set out early on, something like this is completely unacceptable from the standpoint of avoiding overutilization, in this case, not necessarily of a single runway, but you are overutilizing single corridors. And you also are not taking advantage of departure dispersion with the vector headings, which was also a key criteria. A 10-degree heading as opposed to a 25-degree does not disperse the noise. So you have now concentrated the noise into portions of the city, portions of Park Ridge, portions of Schiller Park, Elmhurst, Des Plaines, Bensonville, Elk Grove. This, we would argue, is a complete step backwards as far as predictability and equity. I guess that's what I got. Sorry to take so much time, Joe.
All right. Can people still hear me?
Yes.
Joe.
All right, because I completely lost the visual, so I'll just keep going. All right, we have Dan, Malcolm.
Yes, thank you, Joe.
All right.
Here's the problem. We're going backwards again to the old thing where there's 4 long runways that were in play, and there were 2 diagonals which were crossing a lot of areas and the shortest runways, and we want to make it 50% on those runways, on the 2 runways versus 50% on the other 4. It doesn't seem equitable to me. It seems like an east-west attempt to shift the traffic to those areas that were just mentioned. So obviously very strongly opposed to this. Doesn't make any sense. I think some of the other alternatives like B and C made some sense, but this makes no sense to us at all.
All right. Thank you, Malcolm. Ron?
Yeah, Ryan, can you go back 1 slide? So if you look at this, and it's the same for the 8 weeks before this, in weeks 11 and 12, you're going to be having consecutive impacts of the communities off of each of those ends of the runways. Even with different headings, you're still going to have a portion of people that are going to be under both the arrival and the departure stream. So You can change the order of these weeks to avoid that, but then it essentially just becomes alternative B or C.
Okay. Cynthia?
Joe, I just wanted to answer the second 8 weeks. There are 2 headings on the diagonal configurations, so that second 8 weeks would employ the second heading. That's the only difference.
Okay. Thank you. Alderman Dunn.
Yes, I just want to follow up on Alderman Chester's sentiments that I think the comment was made earlier that this is consistent with some of the premise of, or most of the premise of Fly Quiet, and one of them being not having consecutive community impacts, but clearly this is falling well short of that. So I think that is a rather outlandish statement that this would be considered not having consecutive community impacts.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments?
Dan?
Dan?
If I could just follow up to Cynthia, we want to obviously be sure we understand everything. And this slide's a good one to look at. So Cynthia, just to understand, in this example, weeks 12 and 16 are both departures on 4L. So aren't those in fact the 2 headings, or are you repeating headings, the same heading for 8 weeks and then the alternate for the other 8 weeks?
I'm sorry, Dan, could you repeat that?
Sure. So in this example, weeks 12 and 16 are both 4L departures. So the fact that you're repeating this for a second 8 weeks, doesn't that already constitute your 2 departure headings? Or are you doing the same heading twice in the first 8 weeks and then twice in the second 8 weeks?
Actually, yes, you're correct. So the two 8 weeks are similar. You could consider it an 8-week schedule. I do want to just make a comment on the idea of consecutive impacts, and I've heard from the diagonal communities, pretty strong negativity for this alternative. I guess from a point of fairness, I would like to just illustrate a point that from the north and south parallel communities, that same consecutive impact over arrivals exists in D and E. So if we're going to eliminate H, then for the reason of consecutive impact, then I would also eliminate alternatives D and E.
Okay. Any other questions? All right, Ryan, anything else?
Excuse me, Joe, Frank here. Can I make
I'm sorry, Frank, can you wait till the portion at the end?
It's just a comment, Jeanette, on
Frank, you can't say anything until the end because you're not on the committee.
I understand. I just wanted to add something.
No.
That came from another meeting. Okay, I will bring it up then. No, and this is not something to argue over. It's just there's conflicting information between this committee and another committee.
We don't have a sergeant at arms, so I.
Okay, I wanted to bring back this slide. There's been a lot of talk about the criteria, especially consecutive impacts and overutilizing of runways. So I just wanted to remind the committee of the exact criteria that was developed and approved to develop these alternatives. Obviously, some of the first one here is a no-brainer: establish a nighttime noise abatement program that achieves a more balanced distribution of noise exposure. The second one is important, the runway rotation schedule. So establish a weekly runway rotation schedule, and more importantly, The following runways at a minimum should be utilized in the schedule. And we identified the 9 center, new 9 center, 27 center, 9 right, 27 left, 10 left, 28 right, 10 center, 28 center, and include the 2 crosswinds, 4 left, 2 right, and 4 right, 2 left. Establish a flight path rotation schedule. This refers to the departure headings. So establish a weekly departure procedure rotation schedule to complement the runway rotation schedule in order to achieve a more balanced and equitable distribution of noise exposure. So multiple procedures should be evaluated for all available runways. It doesn't necessarily tie us to multiple departure procedures for each runway, but it is an option. Alternating periods of east flow and west flow. Minimize the overuse of east flow and west flow runway use to the extent possible by alternating periods of east and west flow. Avoiding consecutive impacts. Minimize the potential for impacting areas with the same type of arrivals or departures 2 periods in a row. This kind of criteria, I think, may be interpreted in different ways, and it's worth discussion by the committee as to what they would consider consecutive impacts when we start to refine these alternatives. Utilize runways full length for departures. We talked about this in a previous meeting, our ability to utilize all runways for full length all the time, and we're limited in doing so. Air traffic has requested the ability to use intersection departures. So when possible, departures should use the full length in order to maximize the aircraft altitude. And so we consider, when we talk about full lengths, when operationally feasible to do so. Avoid overuse of any single runway. Avoid the overuse of any single runway identified in item 2, and limit the use of long runways to the extent possible when not in scheduled rotation. So ideally, the long runway identified would only be used when absolutely necessary for an operational reason. Require ONCC Flight Quiet Committee review. Obviously, that's what we're doing now. And the ultimate proposal requires the committee recommendation and full ONC's approval before the CDA would submit to the FAA for review. So we've gone over these 7 alternatives, and on our matrix here we're actually showing 8. Alternative A, again, is our what we refer to as no action. Basically, if we were to do nothing, the broken flight quiet program that is in place previously would stay without any changes. Obviously, that's not a preferred alternative. And so we have our 7 alternatives that we have discussed today. And it's really at this point for the committee to decide how to move forward. Do we try to pare these down into a few alternatives that we can move forward with further refinements? As we discussed, we have a lot of good ideas about how to refine some of the alternatives to better meet the criteria that we discussed.
Okay, thank you, Ryan. Yes, Dan.
Yes, and thank you, Ryan, for explaining this slide. And we thought that this was the good launching point for the discussion on what configurations move forward, because as you can see by the green boxes, and I think Landerman Brown was also taking into account that some of these goals are achievable with some of the future tweaks, that essentially everything meets these key criteria just to different extents. And where we think the process would benefit most is to sort of define some key benchmarks and narrow things down from there. One example would be the committee has expressed a preference towards a quadrant rotation. So if that's the preference, you look at B through H, or do these comply with quadrant rotation? Well, in the case of that, D and E are the only 2 that aren't quadrant rotations. And then you continue based on the priorities, those iterations, to get to an acceptable level to continue. I think a lot of the comments today, some feedback, I hope everyone can still hear me. It might be you, Dennis. But a lot of the comments today are valid and express, I think, everybody's concern. But keeping in mind, there is a process that Landerman Brown and CDA had in mind to get us to the point of narrowing these. And we still think it's premature to vote anything down today until we've allowed them to continue that process. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Evan, you know, I believe the motion was made to table your discussion until after the review. Are you willing to forego your motion until next meeting so we can start then?
No, I would actually like to amend my motion.
Okay.
I'd like to remove D, E, F, and G from consideration.
I'll second that.
Okay, that's your motion.
So that was D, E, F, and G, eliminate. Chairman, would you like a roll call?
Yes.
Wait, Chairman, can we have discussion on the motion?
Oh, of course. I'm sorry. Yes.
Chairman,
Eric, you want to say something?
I understand that the committee will be eliminating alternatives. I think that's appropriate. I'm going to need your help because when we eliminate these alternatives, I need to make sure that the reasons are clear so I can put it in the project record for submittal to the FAA, right? As all of you know, this has been a long process and we need to be clear which alternatives were eliminated and why. So I would just ask before the roll call vote is taken that we are very clear why are these alternatives being eliminated. Thank you.
All right. That's a good point. Evan, do you have a?
I'm not the most eloquent on this, so bear with me. I would, well, from a perfunctory.
Well, let me ask you this: Would it be easier for you if we continued the motion to allow the vote on your alternative until the next meeting, because that'll give you an opportunity to maybe write something down for all of us to look at, including Aaron, so that we're perfectly clear as to why you want to get rid of all of them at once? I mean, I understand why you do. I mean, but I think
yeah, let me
it's
just
important.
spit this, because this is the first time I've been asked to make a declaratory statement for a motion, but I'll play ball.
Thank you.
Your split airfield operations.
To be clear, I don't necessarily need a long reason. I just need to be clear why the alternative was voted down, and I need to be able to articulate that, and I don't want to miscommunicate. So I just need your help. Even
I'm sympathetic to that, Aaron. I totally hear you. So my reasons are a few. D&E are split airfield operations, which I don't think is a wise decision. I think that just creates inherent confusion. So D&E would be removed for that. F and G, I don't think create enough dispersion. Also, there are no strong advocates for D, E, F, or G as far as I can tell. So those would be my reasons.
Okay. Well, Aaron, is that enough for you?
Yes, Chairman, that's enough to go on.
All right.
You have a comment?
Does somebody have a comment? Oh, Dan. All right, we're in the discussion of this motion now.
Okay, this is the discussion to eliminate D, E, F, and G.
Yes.
Okay, I totally agree with Evan on D and E, that those don't meet the committee's criteria, particularly the quadrant rotation. And I think that's a sensible decision. I think on the remaining, I don't think we've had enough time yet, again, to allow Landerman Brown to take these to the next step. And maybe that is what eliminates them, but there is a next step and it does not necessarily slow the process down. I think if anything, and I realize the discussion is on D, E, F, and G, but if we're going to eliminate things based on what we've seen at this meeting, subsequent to this motion, I think there has to be one to eliminate H as well, as really being against the intent of this committee in its entirety, as far as consecutive impacts and overutilization. And if anything achieves the least amount of dispersion, it would be alternative H.
Okay. Evan, you wish to proceed with your motion?
Do wish to proceed with the elimination of alternatives D, E, F, and G.
Okay. No other discussion?
Can you repeat the motion?
The motion is to eliminate from further consideration alternative D, alternative E, alternative F, and alternative G from the Fly Quiet Committee's consideration of a Fly Quiet 21 plan.
All right. Jeanette, you wanted to call the roll?
Okay. Evan Summers made the motion, Karen Robles seconded, and roll call. Bensonville,
Yes.
City of Chicago 39th Ward,
No.
Des Plaines,
No.
Elmhurst,
No.
Harwood Heights, Niles,
Yes.
Park Ridge,
Yes.
River Grove,
No.
Schaumburg,
Yes.
Schiller Park,
Yes.
and Wooddale.
Yes.
1, 2, 3. We have 6 yes and 5 no's.
Okay, the motion passes. D, E, F, and G have been eliminated from further discussions. The only thing I'd like to say is that they're gone but not forgotten.
No, I totally agree, Chairman. I think we can learn from these. I think that further refinement and focusing on B, C, and H, there are flaws in all three of those. I think they can be refined. I think they can be improved, and maybe a merger of all three is what we come out with. So I think there's Landman Brown has the work cut out for him. I appreciate everyone's consideration.
And I have a correction. There's 6 yes and 4 no's.
Okay.
And Jeanette is the 11th vote, an absence.
Yes, Harwood Heights is not with us this
Very
morning.
good, thank you.
All
Joe,
right.
if I could just make a comment quickly.
Yes.
And I agree with Evan, there's flaws in all these and refinements are needed. I think the unfortunate thing, and I think this vote reflects it, is I think this creates some unnecessary division on the committee that hopefully won't be reflected in the broader ONCC. We were really encouraged by the plan that Landerman Brown had laid out to get us to a decision point, and still think that this was premature. And when we look at the vote it took to start this process, which was a 2/3 majority of the ONCC, this sort of division reflects poorly on the ability to get a plan put in place. And I don't see anything that was gained on a timeline by eliminating these in this meeting. And I know the FAA is in the audience and takes note of everything that happens. And I don't think this is encouraging for them as far as community buy-in when they see this number of no votes. So thank you. And I, as you said, Joe, not forgotten, as we start to look at the nuances and shortcomings. What will take more time is if we then have to revisit some of the things that we eliminated. So thanks. Allow me to comment.
All right. Evan?
Yeah, Joe, I would like to follow up on that as well. I would
Okay,
agree
well,
with
first Bensonville, and then you.
I just want to point out, and it's been a while since I did basic fractions, but a 6-4 vote is a 2/3 majority vote.
Alderman Dunn?
Oh, okay. Well, I would debate the math on that, Evan. Six out of 10 is a little less than 2/3. So I would agree with Dan that this is the first time we saw a lot of these options. They should be weighed and evaluated, as Aaron indicated earlier. Our job is to be diligent and to examine our options, to see these for 30 minutes and to throw three or four options out is really not good practice. And I question those on a committee that would agree to do that.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? If there isn't, we'll go to 7. Next ONCC Fly Quiet Committee meeting will be December 8th, 2020. It'll be a Zoom teleconference at 9:30. And now we're going to have comments from the members. And Frank, I believe that's you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. The point that I was trying to bring up earlier, and I wish you would let me say it because it was non-confrontational or anything, is at a prior meeting of the technical committee, and this Evan should have noted this and told everybody this, and also other persons that were at the meeting who are currently have privileges to speak during this meeting. It was brought to our attention by Landrum and Brown that airfield changes that are upcoming include 22 right departures ending. It will be used for arrivals only. And 4 left approaches ending, no more departures. That information should have been included on all of these plans going forward and for the plans that we have already reviewed. Plan H uses 22 right departures and 4 left approaches. Therefore, Plan H will be negated as soon as those plans are put into effect. And it was stated that for all practical purposes, those plans are already in place. Now, Ryan, maybe I misunderstood what you said at the time, but I have my handwritten notes, time and date on my pad. Would you like to correct that, or am I wrong?
Let me pull up alternative H here. All right, one moment. And so you're referring to arrivals on 4 left, which alternative H does not have, and departures on 2 right, which alternative H does not have.
So Ryan, take a minute and explain what the confusion is.
Yeah, so the confusion is this runway 4 left, 2 right has been a bit amended about what operations can be used on that runway, because it's always in practice, it's always been the case for safety reasons not to have arrivals crossing over the airfield here. You can see airfield and arriving on runway. This is for a left approach end. And so
Ryan,
that's
you're speaking about arrivals coming from the southwest.
Correct. Coming from the south.
Not in the direction of the arrow that's shown.
Correct. If you would flip this arrow, this is what I would be referring to, coming from the opposite direction of this arrow, overflying the airfield. That's something that for safety was never really done, and the FAA kind of put it officially on paper that this runway would not be utilized for arrivals in that manner. And opposite to that, if we were to look at week 12 here, and if you were to flip this arrow and make departures on 4 left for the same reason, overflying the airfield here where you have aircraft taxiing and lots of ground movements, the FAA really kind of made it official. It's always been a best practice, but FAA made it official that this runway would not be used for departures in this direction. We are not showing any configurations that would utilize that runway 4 left, 2 right in that manner. So Frank, you were correct in that that was discussed at the technical committee meeting. However, none of our alternatives show the runways being used in that manner.
Okay, I stand corrected. Thank you for clarifying that. And if I have a minute or so left, Joe, I'd like to make a comment. In my opinion, no plan is the best for everyone. There's pain here for everybody. Nothing does, eliminates the pain. An example of a plan that does work, I'm going to call it the COVID plan, because that's what makes sense to me right now. Everyone is happy with the noise levels at night right now. No one is complaining right now. There's far fewer complaints, and I believe everyone here on the committee personally experiences much quieter nighttime usage of the field. I think the plan that would work would be, it would require assertive management from the CDA. Managing 50 of the overnight operations can give us this level of quiet that seems to please everyone. And I would encourage everyone to include that into one of the plans. Let's have a plan that says that aviation will work with the airlines to try to change their flight patterns or times at night. And that would be my only request. Thank you.
And Frank, we could do some procedurally here because I've talked about it in the past. If you do have a question that wants to be brought up during a discussion, you can write it on a piece of paper and give it to one of our members, somebody that you trust other than me, and they will ask.
I trust you, Joe. I trust you. I take none of this personally. Believe me.
No. I
would
say
go
not
with,
because I'm the chairman and I don't want to be.
no, I don't take it. I don't take any of this personally. What happens at the meeting stays at the meeting, and that's it. But I think one of the options that should be considered, and I can't for the life of me understand why it isn't being pursued. We're talking about 25 operations coming in and going out at night. If we can't, as an airport, as a city, if we can't try to manage those, I mean, it's our airport, it's our lives. And if we could do something to make it better for everyone who lives around this airport, I think that would be much better than arguing here over whose axe is going to be gored. From a spectator's viewpoint, and that's where I am right now at this meeting, I'm a spectator. It looks to me a little bit like an amalgamation of the Game of Thrones and the Tudors. And those are two TV series. Some of you may have seen them, some not. But it goes back to feudal arguments about land use and stuff like that. And that's what we're arguing about here. Somebody is saying, I don't want flights over me. Well, if the flights don't go over you, they're going to go over someone else.
Frank, you got 10 seconds.
I'd like to wrap it up by saying thank you for having me here and letting me talk.
All right, thank you.
So we have Ron has a comment.
I'm sorry?
Ron
has a comment? Okay.
It's just a quick question for Aaron regarding documentation. There's been some comments today in the discussion that members only received these or had 30 minutes to review these and talk about the different alternatives. Will the documentation that goes to the FAA though reflect when packets were mailed out to show that the committee members actually had several days to kind of review and digest this to show up today to discuss it?
Yes, we can do that. We don't normally get that far into the details as to who got what documents on what day, but in this case, we can do that, yes.
I mean, the only reason I asked was just because I don't want the record to reflect that people didn't have time to review and look at all of this stuff before the meeting, that they actually had several days to look at it before the discussion.
Sure, we can add that.
Okay, thank you. Comments from the audience?
we have Suzanne.
Suzanne.
I will do my best to. I'm just really angry about how this meeting was very much railroaded. So I'll try. I'm apoplectic now, and I'm trying to calm that down. For alternative C, which I think is probably in H, which are the only left, my comments are For alternative C, which has RNAV, there really needs to be extensive outreach made to effective residents, of which I'm one of them, because we're going to suffer greatly. The corridors on C have a significant population. Again, that's me in the city, and I don't feel that the city and the aldermen have stood up and fought for us. We're the population. And as I think Frank said, there's a lot of NIMBY going on. And, you know, when we talk about consecutives, the east-west runways, we're bearing the brunt for all of you. And I'm going to seriously have to look at moving. And and also the corridors are very sensitive in C, are very sensitive to the environmental justice considerations, again, which I'm at, and that's not considered. So you know, just the smugness on some people's faces here is just, I'm really just furious, and I wish that we would have had a more well-rounded conversation and actually talked about it, because, you know, I'm in marketing, and I'll leave it at this. If we can't afford to do it right, how the hell are we always able to afford to do it twice? Because that's what we're going to be doing. So thank you.
Thank you.
Joe,
Any other?
Dan has a follow-up
Okay,
to Ron's
Dan.
comment.
I don't hear you, Dan.
All right, thanks. Ron makes a good point about when we receive these materials. And to us, a key part of all these discussions has been the ability to not only review the materials, but have the discussion and be able to ask the people that either submitted the materials or the experts in the form of CDA and Landerman Brown for clarification. And that opportunity only came today. So I think it's important that the record reflect that although materials were available, not everyone at this table has the aviation expertise to review the materials prior to these meetings and the ability to ask questions. So to Suzanne's point, yes, totally agree this was a rush process, and that opportunity was not granted to everyone. Not everybody has a JDA or an Avion to review these materials with. So I think it unfortunately put specific communities at a disadvantage to be prepared for this type of decision. And we think it wasn't, I agree with Alderman Dunn, it was inappropriate.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Any other comments from the audience?
There are no more comments.
All right. See, like I said, the next meeting will be December 8th at 9:30. It'll be a Zoom teleconference. Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
I will move so.
Second,
Second? Who was the second?
Karen.
Okay.
Okay, I need a yes and a yes for both. Bensonville,
Yes and yes.
City of Chicago 39th Ward,
Yes and yes.
Des Plaines,
Yes and yes.
Elmhurst,
Yes and yes.
Niles,
Yes and yes.
Park Ridge,
Yes and yes.
River Grove,
Yes and yes.
Schaumburg,
Yes and yes.
Schiller Park,
Yes and yes.
Wooddale.
Yes and yes.
Thank you.
All right, this meeting's adjourned. See you December 8th, or I'll probably before that. Bye, everyone.